History is often relegated to a list of names and places and dates. However, the reality is that history is about real people with many of the same struggles faced today. The stories of the past connect us with those who came before.
Bartholomew County historian Susanna Jones knew that and wanted to convey to everyone that history can be fun and engaging. In 1985, she wrote an excellent book that covered the first 60 years since our county's founding. Obviously, then as now, there is so much history to document, it would be impossible to capture everything. Still, every story has a beginning, and as Susanna's title states, in our case, it began with Bartholomew.
General Joseph Bartholomew was born in 1766. In 1798, Bartholomew brought his family to the newly created Indiana Territory. He gained fame as a military officer, and this is where he met General John Tipton. Both fought at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811 against a powerful Native American alliance formed by the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. However, it was his brother Tenskwatawa that led the forces into battle against his brother's wishes. The Native forces suffered a devastating loss that would have repercussions for decades. Bartholomew and Tipton served in the Indiana State Legislature together and were two of the 10 commissioners chosen to select the site of the new state capital, which would become the city of Indianapolis. Though they were of different political parties, Tipton introduced the 1821 legislation to name the newly formed Bartholomew County after his commander and friend. The generals were no different from any other white inhabitants at that time and believed they were more civilized than the Native Americans. Tipton and Bartholomew spent their military careers fighting indigenous peoples and negotiating often lopsided treaties that allowed white settlers to claim these lands. While some of these actions by our ancestors are cruel by today's standards, we must put them into the context of their times. Should men like Bartholomew and Tipton be held up as heroes? Should they be viewed as villains on the wrong side of history? Or perhaps both? Current and future generations will decide those important questions. Agriculture has always been an integral part of Bartholomew County's economy and growth. Corn, soybeans, and wheat are staples, but other crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, and pumpkins are grown as well. Across the southern part of Bartholomew County in Sand Creek and Wayne Townships, the county's rural landscape is evident. After Bartholomew County was founded in 1821, Sand Creek and Wayne Townships were the first to be organized, and they were in place before the end of that year. Both townships were originally larger than they are today. Some of the area's earliest known history occurred in this area. For example, this farm in Sand Creek Township today was once the home of a pre-contact Native American community from 3,000 years ago. Pre-contact Native Americans lived in the region before European settlers. Archaeologists working in the 1970s found the oldest house patterns in Indiana on the Wint Farm in Sand Creek Township. A house pattern is evidence in the soil of a home that once stood in this location. While the house is long gone, there are stains in the soil left from the structure that rotted away over time. The 3 house patterns that were discovered here show that these homes had an overlapping circular shape. This diagram shows how the soil markings appeared. The houses were built from bent wooden poles, covered in thatch or hides, and after the discovery, archaeologists built a model to show what the structure might have looked like. Because the houses did not have a direct entrance, historians believe the small family band lived here in the winter months, and the guarded entrance kept out the cold air. The people were seasonably mobile, following food sources. In addition to the stains in the soil left by the rotting posts of the homes, archaeologists found fire pits, small bird points, and charred hickory nuts. This Riverton culture group actually cultivated the hickory nut trees growing along the east bank of the East Fork of White River and ate small game, birds, and shellfish. Under the direction of an archaeology professor from Indiana State University and local amateur archaeologists, many volunteers were used to excavate the site from 1977 to 1979. Near the Wint site in the southern part of Sand Creek Township lies the town of Azalea. This area was settled by members of the Society of Friends, often known as Quakers. Many of these settlers arrived from North Carolina in the 1820s and in the 30s. One early Quaker family to settle in Sand Creek Township was the David Newsom family, and their farm played an interesting role in the development of the state. After Indiana achieved statehood in 1816, Corydon had served as the state capital from 1816 to 1824. This early 1820 state map illustrates both Indiana's development from the south northwards and the difficulty with maps while the state was growing quickly, as it shows New Marion County but no Bartholomew County, when in fact Bartholomew County was founded first. This close-up of the same map shows the central location of Corydon in Harrison County just north of the Ohio River. Since the state developed from the south, Corydon was a logical location for the first state capital. In late 1824, the decision was made to move the capital to Indianapolis, which was more centrally located. The state treasurer, Samuel Merrill, loaded up his family along with the state's records and the state's assets and traveled in one wagon pulled by 4 horses to the new capital. It was 132 miles from Corydon to Indianapolis and took 2 weeks to travel that distance. The state's currency was all in silver at the time and was kept in a chest in the wagon. Merrill and his family stopped and stayed at homes along the way, with members of the party reportedly taking turns sleeping with the silver to protect it. The group spent one night at the David Newsom farm in Sand Creek Township. Because the state's official papers were located in Azalea that night, locals claimed that Bartholomew County once was the state capital. This historic marker today identifies where Newsom's home once stood. Sand Creek Township became an important regional transportation link in the 19th century. Early roads in Indiana were often just rough lanes cut through the woods, and so transportation by foot and horseback was difficult and slow. As early as 1828, the town of Azalea had a stagecoach stop, and stagecoaches were 4-wheeled carriages pulled by 2 or 4 horses that were used to transport people from place to place. Travelers could make the journey from Madison to Indianapolis through Azalea and Columbus. The fare was 6 1/4 cents per mile, with 15 pounds of free baggage for a cost of just under $3 between Madison and Columbus. This circa 1830 map shows 2 roads connecting Bartholomew County to towns to the south, including an important route that connected Columbus to Madison, Indiana, and crossed Rock Creek and Sand Creek Township east of Azalea. This road, which eventually became State Road 7, was once known as the Madison Road. After statehood in 1816, Hoosiers and new settlers needed roads to get from the more populated southern part of Indiana to the interior of the state, which was mostly unsettled. 2 early roads were cut from the Ohio River to Indianapolis. The first of these roads was completed in 1824 and was called the Mox Ferry Road. It began at Mockport, which was a river town south of Corydon. The Madison Road was completed 1 year later in 1825, originating in Madison. This 1835 map is one of the earliest Indiana road maps. Both the Mox Ferry and Madison roads can be seen traveling through Bartholomew County and Columbus. The Madison Road had an additional importance to many farmers in Bartholomew County because it was used for driving hogs to market, an important part of pioneer life in the early 19th century in much of the Midwest. Farmers who raised hogs had to get their hogs to market to be sold. Before the arrival of the railroad in the 1840s and 50s, farmers would band their hogs together and drive them to slaughterhouses in Madison, Indiana on the Ohio River. The hog drivers on foot would be accompanied by men on horseback and in wagons. Covering about 8 miles a day, getting to Madison would take a week or so, depending on where in the county they started. Taverns, or 8-mile houses, were built along the way for overnight accommodations for travelers and included pens for the hogs. Most hog drives were in the early winter before the ground froze hard, as the packing houses operated only in the winter months. After arriving in Madison, the hogs were slaughtered and the meat was sent downstream to New Orleans by boat. Not until the 1860s did Columbus have its own stockyard and pork processing plant. As Sand Creek Township's importance as a transportation link was growing for horse and stagecoach traffic, the town of Azalea was platted in 1831. Like Hope and Hartsville, Azalea had a public square. As shown in this 1879 map, Azalea had a store and post office across from the public square. The post office was opened in 1833 and survived until 1934. Azalea had a busy shipping port down Boat Street that was contributing to the growth for many years. Back then, the East Fork of the White River was navigable to the Ohio River. Farmers brought produce, lumber, and livestock to sell downstream. Flatboats would sometimes travel on to New Orleans. Although most businesses in Azalea are now gone, Azalea has a grain elevator on the south side of town for the agricultural business nearby. The public square is now a park, and the old general store and post office building, visible in the background, is now converted to a house. Transportation throughout Bartholomew County and all of Indiana changed dramatically with the arrival of the railroad in the 1840s. Construction of the first railroad in Indiana began in September of 1836 in Madison, which was an important center of commerce on the banks of the Ohio River. The steep and beautiful hills that surrounded Madison make construction of the railroad to the north very difficult and required cutting through solid rock. Once completed, the Madison Incline was among the steepest railroad grades in the United States. It took a total of 7 years before the tracks were completed from Madison to southeast Bartholomew County in 1843. Elizabethtown was platted as the first stop along the railroad within the county. Then it took 10 more months for the railroad to extend 7.5 miles further north to Columbus and 3 more years to reach Indianapolis. In total, construction of the line from Madison to Indianapolis lasted 11 years. Less than 10 years after the Madison and Indianapolis line brought railroad travel to Bartholomew County, the Jeffersonville and Indianapolis line was constructed further west. This time, the railroad came from due south and made its first Bartholomew County stop in the Wayne Township town of Jonesville, which was platted by Benjamin Jones in 1851. Smith Jones, son of Jonesville's founder, became the first postmaster the following year when the Jonesville post office was established. And later he would serve as the first mayor of Columbus after the city was incorporated in 1864. By 1900, Jonesville was a bustling town with 3 trains daily between Jeffersonville and Indianapolis. One of the oldest establishments in Jonesville is still standing today, the Jonesville Tavern, known affectionately as the Brick. The building was built in 1903 on the site of a tavern that had burned a few years before. Today, Jonesville and Elizabethtown, early Bartholomew County towns that sprang up due to the railroad's arrival, still exist, but they face challenges as small rural towns. Jonesville population over more than 160 years has remained largely the same, close to 200 inhabitants. The loss of its post office in 2011 was a big blow to the town, but a variety of businesses and churches remain. Elizabethtown's population is more than double that of Jonesville, and double its size in the late 19th century. Elizabethtown has active churches, along with a grain elevator to serve the agricultural community. The town's post office has been open since 1844, and one of the oldest school buildings in Bartholomew County still stands in Elizabethtown. The Greek Revival School building was built in 1869. It once had a 2-year and 4-year high school and later was used as a Masonic hall and then a residence. After the school was closed in 1915, another school was built northeast of town called the Sand Creek Township School. Today, the site where the Township School once stood is a public park. Azalea did not benefit as Elizabethtown and Jonesville did when the railroad first arrived in the county, but in 1889 a regional train between Seymour and Elizabethtown stopped in Azalea. More importantly, Azalea had a stop on the interurban line in the early 20th century. The interurban was an intercity electric train that connected Bartholomew County to Louisville to the south and Indianapolis to the north from about 1900 to 1941. Interurbans were popular in other states, but Indiana had one of the most extensive interurban systems in the country. This 1912 map shows the regular railroad in black and the interurban electric railroad in red. The Irwin family of Columbus invested in both the Interstate Public Service Power Company and the Interurban, which was run by the Power Company. Interurban tracks generally followed the path of power lines between cities. In 1900, the first interurban opened in Indiana, and in 1903, service began between Indianapolis and Columbus. The Irwins operated the line, which became the Indianapolis, Columbus, and Southern Traction Company, and eventually extended to Louisville through Azalea. Interurbans used existing streetcar tracks within cities and were popular both for their cost and because they could deliver passengers directly downtown and not to the outskirts of town where traditional railroad stations were often located. This map shows the interurban tracks labeled Public Service Company, extending between Azalea and Columbus. While the railroad station in Columbus was located near Millrace Park, the interurban stopped right on Washington Street at 3rd Street, as shown in this photo from the 1920s, with the Bartholomew County Courthouse visible in the background. Although south of Columbus, the interurban tracks and Pennsylvania Railroad tracks took separate routes. North of town, both sets of tracks ran together. This early 20th century photo shows the interurban tracks running down the middle of the view underneath the power lines. As automobile traffic became cheaper and more households owned cars, the interurbans declined in popularity. The last interurban in Indiana closed in 1941. Eventually, the tracks were removed and most evidence of the interurban disappeared. This mid-20th century aerial photo shows Azalea after the interurban tracks were gone, but with the substation visible within the line of utility poles that previously powered the interurban cars. Today, the substation is still standing in the middle of a farm field covered in vegetation. Another important story in the history of Bartholomew County and the United States was a different kind of railroad, the Underground Railroad. Before the Civil War, the economy of southern plantation owners depended on slave labor to cultivate and plant the fields and harvest the crops. Helping slaves escape to freedom was against the law and could result in losing property or going to jail. A secret system developed to help slaves run away to freedom in the North or in Canada, where slavery was illegal. Called the Underground Railroad, it was not a real railroad with trains or tracks. It was a network of secret routes and hiding places established to help slaves escape until they were far enough north that they couldn't be caught and taken back to a slave owner. Men called conductors aided and sheltered the runaways, moving individuals or small groups from one safe house to another.
Many of the conductors of the Underground Railroad were members of the Society of Friends, commonly called the Quakers. They practiced civil disobedience. They broke a law that they thought was unjust, and they knew that they could face consequences if caught. They lived by their ideals, and they risked being in harm's way for what they thought was right. Escaped slaves could cross the Ohio River into Indiana, which was a free state. They would go through Jeffersonville, New Albany, Salem, Seymour, and eventually they could end up here in Sand Creek Township in Bartholomew County. If they made it that far, they might encounter John Hall, a local Quaker and conductor who would keep them safe in an underground room that was accessed through a trap door in his kitchen that was underneath the kitchen rug. John Hall's farm sets up this country lane and just above where the first Quaker church in this community was located. Mr. Hall's church was the Sand Creek Society of Friends. In 1824, it's established. The first building was a log cabin. It was later removed and made into a frame structure. Shortly thereafter, they built a seminary. The Sand Creek Seminary, for 9 years, prepared students to go to Earlham College, which was established in 1847. After 9 years, that was closed and the building became a community school. And if you are at the Sand Creek Cemetery, there's a water pump, and it would have sat right beside that water pump. In 1950, the Sand Creek Church closed because of structural weaknesses, and the members joined the church here in the Azalea. It was a good partnership, tremendous partnership. They combined names of the churches. Sand Creek offered some great furniture that they could bring south to Azalea, and Azalea offered a solid building structurally, and they made it work. John Hall had a neighbor, John Thomas. He was to the west of the cemetery, to the west of Pleasant Hill. John Thomas helped the escaped slaves and the fugitives as well. He hid his passengers in the nearby fields and in the river bottoms, and like other conductors, he found a way to get them food. Contrary to the common Quaker traditional colors, Mr. Thomas painted his gate to his farm red so that the slaves would have a visible sign of where safety was. He had a habit of never asking passengers what their name was because he wanted to keep a clear conscience when the slave catchers would come by and ask about a specific slave. When they left his farm, fugitives would travel to East Columbus. There they would follow the tracks of the Cambridge branch of the JM&I Railroad. And they would take that all the way to Carthage, Indiana, which was the next Underground Railroad station. A more famous conductor was Levi Coffin, the leader of the Underground Railroad. Levi Coffin bought property in Jackson County that was sat near the Driftwood Quaker meeting. He also is documented to have attended the churches here in Sand Creek Township as well. Several members who were conductors were buried at the Sand Creek Cemetery. John Hall has a simple marker that's just west of the flagpole. Also buried there are James Newsom and John Thomas. And nearby, there's a marker for Thomas Cook, who was a Revolutionary War soldier. We are right now in the Sand Creek Azalea Meeting House. Built in 1875, by 1950 it becomes the single church here in Azalea and for Sand Creek Township. It was built the same time the Hope Moravian Church was built, and so you'll see some structural similarities. And like a number of churches in the area, it was built from brick that was actually made here in Azalea. The limestone foundation comes from Jennings County.
Not long after Sand Creek Township was settled, a new wave of immigrants came to southern Bartholomew County in Wayne and Jackson Townships. Beginning in the late 1830s, German immigrants arrived and settled in the White Creek area of southern Bartholomew County. Over the next several decades, more German settlers came to other parts of Bartholomew County as well. Many of these early settlers were farmers who had toiled in Germany paying rent to wealthy landowners, and they came for the economic opportunities in the vast United States. Many of the early German settlers to Bartholomew County were members of a Protestant faith called Lutherans. St. John's White Creek Lutheran Church in Wayne Township was the first German Lutheran congregation in Bartholomew County and was organized in 1840. Within a few years, the congregation had purchased 40 acres for $50 and built a log cabin to serve as a place of worship. In 1862, a new brick structure was built to house the growing congregation. Most of the work was done by congregation members, and the bricks used in construction were made locally. One of the church's co-founders was Johann Heinrich Sirovista, who immigrated from Germany to the United States in 1834 and arrived in the White Creek area by 1840. In the years following his arrival in the United States, Sirovista wrote numerous letters home to his family in Germany, 31 of which survive and have been published. The letters describe early life in the Midwest and include observations about the United States at the time, including slavery, presidential elections, and the Civil War, seen through the eyes of an immigrant. Sirovista is buried in the church cemetery, which is located behind the 1862 building where the St. John's congregation at White Creek continues to worship. Also located on church property is the White Creek Lutheran School, which was started shortly after the church was founded. Education was especially important to German immigrants, and eventually all German Lutheran churches in the area established schools. Although the buildings have changed, White Creek Lutheran School has been educating children for over 170 years. Two other early German Lutheran churches in the southwest corner of Bartholomew County show the extent of German influence at that time: St. Peter Lutheran in Waymansville and St. Paul's Lutheran in Jonesville. The influence spread into Columbus as well, with the founding of St. Paul's Lutheran at Clifty in 1848 and St. Peter's Lutheran in Columbus in 1858. St. John's at White Creek was the original German Lutheran church from which the others were eventually created, usually by parishioners who decided to worship closer to where they lived and so created new church communities. Lutherans living in the Waymansville area in the 1840s and 1850s traveled to White Creek or to a Lutheran church in Jackson County before deciding to start their own congregation closer to home. In 1870, they purchased an old Methodist church building and worshiped there for about 10 years before the current brick building was constructed. Today, the Waymansville Church building appears much the same as it did in early years. The altar at the front of the sanctuary was purchased by the church in 1900. St. Paul's Church in Jonesville was formed in 1877 by members of the White Creek Lutheran Church living in the Jonesville area. The church building was constructed in 1893, and like other German Lutheran congregations, all services were initially in German, and the transition to English was gradual. Not until 1942 were all church services performed in English. Lutheran churches were not the only early congregations in southwest Bartholomew County. In 1846, 7 German Lutheran families from White Creek organized as a Methodist congregation after being attracted to the enthusiastic Methodist Episcopal circuit riders traveling through the area. White Creek Methodist Church built a small log cabin in Jackson Township in 1850 and a larger frame structure in 1872. Unfortunately, in 1916, a carbide light system exploded and destroyed the church. While no one was injured, only the pews, the pulpit, and the organ were saved. A new church was constructed that year, and today's congregation worships on the same historic wooden pews from the earlier church building. The southwest corner of Bartholomew County is also home to several unincorporated communities. In Jackson Township, Mount Healthy was a small settlement founded in 1843 and consisting of 18 lots perched on a hill. The town's name was chosen because locals believed that the higher ground was healthier as it was removed from the humidity of the lowlands that brought a higher risk of fever and illness. At its peak in 1888, Mount Healthy had approximately 50 residents. Now Mount Healthy consists of just a few homes and a cemetery. One of the 11 current Bartholomew Consolidated Elementary Schools is Mount Healthy Elementary, which sits near the original high ground. North of Mount Healthy in Ohio Township is another unincorporated community called Ogleville. When founded in 1850, the town was called Moore's Vineyard, as shown in this 1879 map. In 1893, the name changed to Ogleville. This map from 1900 shows the town situated a little further north on the road that would someday be State Road 58. John H. Taylor owned much of the land around Ogleville at that time and ran the flour mill and sawmill. Twice a week, he would make the approximately 12-mile trip to Columbus with a wagon full of flour, a trip which took a full day, and a wagon pulled by 2 mules. Difficult road conditions meant slow travel at the start of the 20th century, but today, State Road 58 is an important connection between the southwest corner and the rest of the county. In addition to State Road 58, another important north-south road in the western part of the county is State Road 11. North of the communities of White Creek and Jonesville in Wayne Township, State Road 11 follows the railroad tracks that still connect areas south of the county to Columbus and Indianapolis. The road was once known as the Driftwood Valley Pike because the historic name for the East Fork of the White River was the Driftwood River. Eventually, the Driftwood River ended when it joined the Flat Rock River in Columbus to form the East Fork of the White River. During much of the 20th century, the road was known as US 31A before becoming State Road 11. Walesboro is located off State Road 11, 4 miles south of Columbus in Wayne Township, 3 miles east of Interstate 65. It is an unincorporated town founded in 1851 by John P. Wales, who platted 34 lots and laid out the streets. It was located on the Jefferson, Madison, and Indianapolis Railroad. In 1942, during World War II, the U.S. Army Air Force chose a site west of Walesboro as an auxiliary flying field for Freeman Field in Jackson County. The government purchased 809 acres of land, and 58 residents were forced to move within a month. Dubbed Freeman Field Auxiliary No. 1 Walesboro Field, the military built 2 4,500-foot hard-surface runways for pilots of multi-engine aircraft in advanced flight training to practice touch-and-go landings and takeoffs. Completed in 1943, it was one of 5 satellite airfields for Freeman Field, only 2 of which were paved. The Walesboro Auxiliary Flying Field was declared surplus by the War Department in February of 1946, since it had not been active since the end of World War II in 1945. From 1946 to 1970, the landing field served as the Columbus Municipal Airport and afterwards became a business and industrial park for Arvin Industries, Cummins, Hamilton Costco, Forcia, and others. Today, State Road 11 travels past the Bartholomew County 4-H Fairgrounds, but in the late 19th century, the road passed the county poor farm, which housed those who were too old or too poor to support themselves. The 160-acre property was a working farm, and residents, who were often called inmates, labored on the farm, which struggled with sometimes unsanitary conditions. In 1959, the poor farm was permanently closed, and Bartholomew County Home for the Aged opened in East Columbus at Illinois and Gladstone. At the same time that the poor farm was being phased out, the site was transitioning to another important county function, home of the county fair. This 1962 topographical map shows the fairgrounds just west of State Road 11, shown in red, and the railroad tracks. The poor farm is still labeled, although it had been abandoned 3 years earlier. Bartholomew County had held popular fairs off and on since 1852. Early fairs took place at different locations around Columbus and East Columbus, but in 1910 the first permanent fairgrounds opened on 25th Street, just east of Central Avenue. In 1910, 25th Street was outside the city limits, and streetcars carried citizens from town to the fairgrounds. This 1911 postcard shows an unpaved 25th Street running by the new fairgrounds. By 1930, Columbus had grown enough that this map shows the fairgrounds in the top right or northeast corner of the city. The 25th Street Fairgrounds included a large racetrack for harness racing and then eventually auto and motorcycle racing. This photo shows the grandstand at the track in the mid-20th century. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, Columbus continued to grow until the 25th Street Fairgrounds were eventually surrounded by development and left without any room to expand. In this map, the fairgrounds are in light gray with the larger dark gray city limits. In the mid-1950s, the decision was made to move the fairgrounds to an area southwest of the city on what is today State Road 11. The first county fair on the new grounds took place in 1958 in a much larger fairgrounds that is still in use. The surrounding area was rural at the time, but Southside Elementary School and several residential neighborhoods now stand nearby. When the fair moved, a white wooden pagoda, which was the judging stand for popular harness racings and which had stood at every fairground in Bartholomew County fair history, was left at the 25th Street location. Time took its toll on the old structure until its dilapidated condition forced a decision about its future when the former fairgrounds property was to be turned into a shopping mall in the 1980s. A group of citizens rallied to save the pagoda, and in 1988 it was moved to the new fairgrounds where it still stands. During summer, the fairgrounds welcome thousands of people for the Bartholomew County 4-H Fair. Thousands of others visit the fairgrounds for other public and private events throughout the year. West of the fairgrounds, the geography of Harrison, Ohio, and Jackson Township differs from the rest of the county. While there is still farmland, especially in Ohio and Jackson Townships, the western side of Bartholomew County is much hillier and more densely forested than elsewhere in the county. This 1960s-era topographical map of Columbus and the southwest part of the county records the area's hills and valleys. While Harrison and Ohio Townships are today the westernmost part of the county, it was not always this way. Directly west of Bartholomew County is Brown County, which is known for its picturesque landscapes, and for Brown County State Park, at over 15,000 acres, the largest state park in Indiana. The park is especially popular in the fall when thousands of visitors come to see the colorful fall foliage. Those familiar with Brown County do not often know that most of the area was originally part of Bartholomew County. In the 1820s and early 1830s, Bartholomew County directly bordered Monroe County. In 1836, Brown County was carved out, with most of its area coming from Bartholomew County and small pieces from Monroe and Jackson counties. The geography of the western part of the county, especially Harrison Township, led to a unique type of development in the region. Much of this hilly land was not farmable, as evidenced in this 1940s land use map. The areas of western Bartholomew County, colored in black, are labeled rough land, unsuited to agriculture. In the mid-20th century, locals and visitors alike realized that the picturesque wooded region would be the ideal location for the development of recreation and vacation properties. In 1935, local industrialist Q.G. Noblet, one of the founders of Arvin Industry, who was known for his interest in forestry and conservation, donated 70 acres of land and money to develop Columbus Youth Camp in central Harrison Township. The Civilian Conservation Corps built the lakes, trails, and original 6 cabins. The Civilian Conservation Corps was a national program developed during the Great Depression to relieve unemployment by hiring men to do conservation work across the country. In 1958, the Lowell Engelking family donated another 40 acres to increase the size of Youth Camp. Today, Youth Camp is owned by the Foundation for Youth and includes 137 acres with 7 miles of trails, a mountain bike trail, challenge courses, and an outdoor amphitheater, all of which are used for camps and outdoor learning experiences. Many local adults have fond memories of events at Youth Camp. Q.G. Noblet had an interest in land management, and he recognized the need to increase housing options for those moving to Bartholomew County to work in local industry. Noblet was also a pioneer in the creation of man-made lakes in the southern Indiana area and was responsible for dramatic changes in Harrison and Ohio townships with a variety of lake developments. He developed Noblet Falls, now called the Lagoons, within the city of Columbus and Harrison Lakes in Harrison Township. Noblet also started the planning for Grandview Lake before his death in 1954. The first West Side Lake addition was Harrison Lakes in central Harrison Township. Planning began prior to 1945, but it was several years before Noblet's vision was realized. First came the opening of the Harrison Lake Country Club in 1947. Noblet then platted the former farmland near the club, and the lakes were dug. The lakes remained empty, however, until major rains came in January of 1949 that filled them. Today, 150 homes are located at Harrison Lakes. In 1961, Tamarix Lake was developed by Bob Simpson. This map of part of Harrison Township shows Tamarix Lake south of the Harrison Lake development with Youth Camp to the west. The largest single lake in Bartholomew County is Grandview Lake, which straddles the line between Harrison and Ohio townships. Noblet envisioned this as a vacation area, selling 3,200 acres of land south of Youth Camp for the creation of a 400-acre lake surrounded by roads and homes. Construction of the dam to create the lake began in 1953, but Noblet died the following year. It took many years to complete the dam with numerous problems with engineering and financing. The road around the lake was completed in the 1970s. Today, there are over 300 home lots with fewer than half the owners living full-time on Grandview. Also on the west side of Columbus, but closer to the town, is the Tipton Lakes development. In the late 1960s, after Harrison and Grandview Lakes were developed, the need for more housing in Columbus had become apparent due to the growth in local industry and the increase in population. Local industrialist J. Irwin Miller purchased 1,200 acres for new neighborhoods west of town, and the area was annexed in 1979 to become part of the city. This 1982 map shows the future Tipton Lakes area colored gray to match the rest of Columbus, but without any lakes present. Harrison Lakes and Grandview Lake are visible. The dam and 3 lakes were constructed first, along with the initial Tipton Lakes Addition neighborhood. Since then, over 1,000 homes have been built in the area. This 2013 map shows the size of Tipton Lakes area at that time, and the aerial photo shows one of the lakes in 2020. Over its first 200 years, Bartholomew County has changed dramatically. Initially, settlers were attracted to the rich farmland in the county, and family farms dominated the landscape. Residents developed a sense of community with their neighbors as they worked together to make a living. Gradually, small towns sprung up all over the county. Manufacturing came quickly to the young county, first in the form of various mills to provide grain, wool, wood, and more for pioneer life. Industry then developed to support the agricultural needs both inside and outside of the region. While early industry was scattered around the county, by the end of the 19th century, Columbus, the county seat, was becoming the center of manufacturing, as evidenced in this circa 1890 photo of downtown. Around the turn of the 20th century, Columbus was the home of many important companies, including a high-quality furniture maker known around the world, the world's largest tannery producing all manner of leather goods, and a contracting firm building bridges, courthouses, and more all over the United States. Just a few years later, Columbus also became the birthplace of a future world-leading diesel engine company. Bartholomew County also produced many individuals who would make their marks both inside and outside of the community, including many members of a single family. This also included men and women who were pioneers in manufacturing, banking, journalism, industry, sports, and more. Some of these stories from the past and present are very well known, and many notable local residents enjoyed years of success within their professions. Today, there are others from Bartholomew County who are early in their careers and yet already making a big impact. Through most of the past 200 years, the population of Bartholomew County outside of Columbus equaled or surpassed the population of Columbus itself. While some small towns were formed and then faded away, many others survived and thrived. Schools, churches, civic groups, family businesses, and more have given small-town county residents a sense of community that persisted even while population shifts moved many away from rural living. Today, Bartholomew County includes a vibrant population of more than 80,000 that is spread out over 400 square miles of city, towns, and farms. Many families have strong roots in the area, and there are numerous local farms that have remained in the same family for 100 years or more. Since the first immigrants arrived in the area from Germany in the county's early years, many international residents have called Columbus home, often sharing their traditions with the rest of the community. Today, international residents and their families support the more than 24 international companies that provide jobs to over 8,000 residents in Bartholomew County. The area is home to numerous special industries, including machinery and engine manufacturing, and transportation and automotive equipment manufacturing, and more. Several U.S. research and development centers are also located here. All in all, 35% of local employment is in manufacturing, and Columbus and Bartholomew County have won numerous awards for being a top tech and manufacturing region. For more than 200 years, while much has changed, our sense of community as Bartholomew County residents has remained the same. Over the years, we have endured hardship. We have cherished family. Our children have learned together, and they have socialized together. We have worked together, and worshiped and played together. The community has celebrated and solved problems together. We have competed and explored new ideas, created new traditions, and celebrated our differences together. As we move into our next 200 years, we can learn from our county's rich history that while many things are ever-changing, our pride and sense of community in being Bartholomew County citizens will continue to tie us together.
For over a century, the Bartholomew County Public Library and the Bartholomew County Historical Society have worked to discover, collect, preserve, and share the stories of the people who made Bartholomew County what it is today. We are indebted to the previous work of individuals who believed, as we do, that the knowledge of our collective history is critical to understanding our present and as a valuable tool for informing the future. People like George Pence, Vida Newsom, Ross Crump, Susanna Jones, Harry McCauley, and Tammy Stone Iorio all made it their life's work to think about the generations who came after and to make sure our history was not lost.
No matter if your family has been here since the county's founding in 1821, or if you recently located here, Bartholomew County's story is your story. Be inspired by those that came before you, and determine from their struggles and their triumphs, what can be your story and how can you make an impact? History is happening every day. Don't let it pass you by. We're very grateful and excited to be a part of this lifelong journey with you.